Welcome back to another video. Now in today's video I'm going to be doing a review on the Canon 77D. Now a few videos ago I made a video introducing you to this camera and I've had quite a few people message me saying they actually really want to see a review, so here I am today. So jumping straight into this review, if we look on Amazon, the Canon 77D with the 18 to 55mm lens comes in at £760, but depending on where you buy it, prices will obviously vary. Now also on Amazon, the Canon 77D gets a 4.6 star rating, but it doesn't have very many reviews, so it isn't 100% reliable, but obviously the reviews vary on where you buy your camera from. Now also throughout, this is going to be a long video, so if you go into the description, I have different timestamps for all sorts of different bits in the video, so you can just click on that timestamp and it will take you to the bit where I talk about the bit that you need to know about. So when you open the box, you obviously get the camera body, you get whichever lens you bought with it, in my case the 18 to 55mm f4 to 5.6. You get a battery, you get the battery charger, you get a little lens cap to go on the front of your lens and a little kind of protector that goes on the back of your lens when it's not on your camera. You also have a little cap that can go on the front of your camera when you haven't got a lens on to protect the mirror and the sensor. And then finally you also get a whopping instructions manual which is about an inch thick, which I don't think anyone's going to ever read. So let's start off this review by taking a look at the lens that comes with the camera. So as I mentioned before, it comes with an 18 to 55mm f4 to 5.6, which is a really nice small and compact lens, which weighs around 215 grams, which isn't actually that heavy. Now it's obviously cheaper to buy the camera body with the lens in one package, but you can buy the lens separately for around £200. Obviously prices vary from where you buy it from. So the lens comes with STM autofocus, which is much quieter and better than micro motor autofocus. Now the lens has continuous focusing throughout video, which is really helpful for vloggers who are filming themselves on the go and they can't concentrate on focusing themselves in the whole time, and it's constantly keeping the face face tracking and you in focus the whole time. So the lens has a vastly improved manual focusing ring. Now it's got a really wide focus area, so you can do much more precise focusing, and that's much better than the old focus rings that the Canon lenses used to have, the kit lenses, so it makes manual focusing a lot easier. Now the lens is a varied aperture lens, which means that as you zoom in, your shot will become darker as the f-stop number increases. It doesn't really matter to me, but some people, if you're on the go, quick moving, if you focus in, you may have to up your ISO or lower your shutter speed in order to compensate for the loss of light let into the camera. But in order to get a fixed aperture lens, the price is much higher and you'll end up paying a lot more for those lenses. Now the lens creates really nice background blur and bokeh, but if you are really looking for a really strong background blur and really strong bokeh, then I definitely recommend going for a lower aperture lens like f1.4, f1.8, something like that. You'll get really heavy background blur, but obviously again the price shoots up the lower the stop of light that you get. Now this lens comes with built-in image stabilization, which is really nice to see on a lens that costs around £200. Now it's really helpful when you're filming cinematic video, normal video, it just comes in really helpful. Now at wide apertures, this lens does a really good job at avoiding flares from the sun in the corner of the frame, for example, but as you go into narrower apertures, then the lens flares become more noticeable. But obviously you can buy a lens hood like I have right here, and it basically can eliminate all the flares coming in from the side of your lens. Now the lens has a low amount of linear distortion, especially at around the 24mm range, but the barrel distortion becomes more noticeable as you go down to sort of the 18mm, and it's obviously especially noticeable at close range. But obviously you can realign your image, correct your image in your editing software. Like for me, Lightroom, I can just correct the image and make the barrel distortion sort of go away. Now the autofocusing in this lens is really quiet. You literally have to lock yourself in a room, put your ear right next to it, and you could probably just about hear it. It's really quiet, which is really good. Now overall, I think this lens is really good considering it's £200, which is a lot cheaper than a lot of lenses. I think it's really good. But if you're looking for a high level professional photographer, sort of lens, then I definitely recommend going for something like a Canon L lens, Sigma lenses, and generally lenses with fixed apertures and stuff like that. So now let's take a look at the camera body itself. Now the Canon 77D is a lot lighter and more compact than cameras like the 70D and the 80D, and it obviously weighs around 550 grams without the lens, so it's definitely lighter than its competitors. Now the weight reduction of this camera means for people who are vlogging, holding the camera up in their arms makes it a lot easier and a lot lighter, making their arms less tired as quickly, meaning they can film for longer. So like most Canon cameras, the Canon 77D comes with an EF mount, and there are loads of lenses that support EF mounts, so you won't have a problem trying to find the lens. And then on the bottom of the camera, we also have a little small thread hole, which can be used to attach your camera to a tripod and all sorts of things like that. So now I'm going to run you through some of the inside specs of this camera, the processor, the sensor. So this camera is built with an APS-C CMOS sensor. Now this isn't full frame, but in this stage of photography and videography, there are only minor benefits to having a full frame camera. So the Canon 77D has a Digic 7 processor. Now this processor is really fast and responsive. The Canon 77D also has 45 autofocus points, which means that you can select your focus point all around that area, which gives you a wide range to focus on. And the camera also has dual pixel autofocus, which is really smooth for video, really accurate, and you really only see it in its really much more expensive cameras, so it's great to see in the Canon 77D. So you can use the back LCD on this camera to use your finger and move around the focus point. So you can see me here, you can just put your finger on, move your focus point to different areas, and you can see how smooth and clean the dual pixel autofocus is. Now this camera also has face tracking, and it's tracking my face right now. So as I come in, you can see it's constantly keeping my face in focus the whole time. And if I move to the left and the right, back and forth, you can see that my face is always in focus, which is really nice. Now the Canon 77D can shoot in full HD 60 frames per second, which is good, but it would have been nice to see the camera if it could shoot in 120 frames per second as well. Now the camera itself has 5-axis digital image stabilization, which with the lens's stabilization works really nicely to create smooth footage. Now later on in the video near the end, I'm going to be doing a test showing you what the difference between the actual smooth footage with the image stabilization on and off looks like, so stay tuned to the end to check that one out. So this camera has a 24.2 megapixel sensor, which is good, but there are cameras you can buy with higher megapixels. But it does create a nice clarity and detail in your image. Now in the camera we have built-in Wi-Fi, NFC and Bluetooth, which makes connecting to your laptop, your phone, super easy to transfer your photos and videos across without having to take your SD card out. But personally, I take my SD card out and put it inside of my computer. I just find that easier and quicker for me. So on the rear LCD of this camera, we have a touchscreen. Now touchscreen makes it way easier to control your camera, and you can more or less do everything just from the touchscreen. You could pretty much use no buttons, and I'm sure you could control your whole camera, which is really nice and really helpful, especially for beginners who don't know how to use all the dials. Now, as I showed you before, you can use the rear LCD to focus your shot. You can just tap on the screen wherever you want, it will focus, or you can just hold your finger on and drag the focus point around. It's basically the same thing. This is all greatly helpful from the dual pixel autofocus, but it is really nice and is different change from using the half shutter button press or the back button autofocus. Now having this touchscreen obviously makes it a lot easier to navigate through the menu, so you can just use your finger to basically just touch the screen throughout the menu. You can go through, click all the things, make it super easy. Now, like on a lot of Canon cameras, the LCD screen on the back can flip out. You can twist it, turn it. When you're shooting from above you, you can twist the screen so you can see it from down below. And if you're doing low down cinematics, for example, you can flip the screen up, and then as you're filming along the ground, you can just see that screen. And you can also flip the screen so the screen side is against the camera, and then you have the back of the screen towards you, and that avoids the camera from getting scratched and damaged. So now let's take a look at the menu. So over a few years, the menus from Canon's cameras have improved, and they have improved on the Canon 77D. They're obviously really easy to navigate, and it obviously depends which mode you're in and how many settings you get. So when I'm in manual mode, for example, you have access to all the menu, so every single feature. But if you're in full auto mode, you have a limited amount of things that you can change. So now let's take a look at the mode dial in this camera. Now there's quite a few modes, so I'm just going to quickly run through them, just give you an idea of what all of them do. So the first mode is manual mode, and now this means that you can control everything yourself: shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and you have access to the whole menu to change anything that you want. Next, we have aperture priority, which means that you can change the aperture yourself and the camera will do everything else for you. Then we have shutter priority, which is where you get to change the shutter speed and the camera will do everything else for you. Next, we have program auto, which is where the camera will do everything for you and then you get to change your ISO, how bright your image is going to be. Moving on from that bracket, we have scene intelligent auto, which is where the camera does entirely everything for you. You don't have to touch the camera at all. The camera will do everything for you, but this also means that you have a limited range in the menu to change up your settings. Next, we have the flash off mode. Now this means the camera does everything else for you, but the flash doesn't come up if you're in places where you don't want it to come up. Now the next mode we have is creative auto. Now I think this is quite an interesting mode to help beginners out, and it has little sliders like adjusting the sharpness and blurriness of your image, which is actually just adjusting the aperture, but it helps beginners out who don't really understand how all that stuff works, and it can help them out quite easily. Next, we have portrait mode, which is similar to creative auto, but it allows you to adjust the brightness while the camera does everything else for you. Then we have landscape mode, which again is similar to the two ones before, but it allows you to adjust the brightness, the drive mode, while the camera does everything else for you. Nearing the end, we have close-up mode. Now this helps you, assist you with taking out close-up shots, macro shots if you're getting really close to something. Then we have sports mode, which is really helpful if you're taking videos of sports, as in the name. It basically raises up your shutter speed to be really high, to help you out when fast moving subjects. Next, we have special scene, where you get to choose the different scene that you're in, and you can pick it. Basically, you select something and it will change the color tones and that sort of stuff. Now finally, we have creative filters. Now this is basically like the mode just before, but this is just heavy filters over the top. Now I definitely recommend not using this mode, and definitely if you're going to use filters or presets or custom LUTs and stuff, I definitely recommend doing that in your editing, in your software. Definitely don't do it in the camera. I just don't think it's a very good thing to do. Now, quite a lot of Canon's cameras, the DSLRs, the mirrorless cameras, have top LCDs, and obviously this is the same with the Canon 77D. Now, the top LCD isn't quite as big as cameras like the 5D Mark III or any of the 5Ds, for example, but it's generally a lot bigger than any of the top LCDs on Canon's mirrorless cameras. Now this comes in really helpful when you're shooting on the go and you just want to quickly see what your ISO is at, your shutter speed's at, and your aperture's at, and it also tells you things like whether your Wi-Fi is on or not, which is definitely really helpful when it comes to quick shooting. So here we are. I'm now going to do an image stabilization test, as I promised earlier on in the video. Now the stabilization in this camera and the lens isn't obviously as good as a gimbal, but it is pretty impressive. So right now you can see me filming something without any stabilization on, and I'll let that play for a few seconds. And now you can see me filming with all the stabilization on, and you can see how smooth the footage is compared to it without any stabilization. So now let's take a look at the burst rate in this camera. So it takes 6 shots per second, which sounds a bit like this. Now this is faster than cameras like the T6S, for example, and is probably fast enough for most things you're going to do. But if you want a camera that shoots more frames per second, you're going to look at something that costs way more than, for example, cameras like the Canon 77D. So in conclusion, I think the Canon 77D is an amazing camera and especially good considering it's under £1,000. Now hopefully this review really did help you out and you learned a lot. You now know whether you want to buy the Canon 77D or you don't want to buy it. This video took ages to make, so I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like, maybe subscribe if you want to. That would mean loads to me. Now if you have any questions, any queries, then don't forget to message me on Instagram. The link is in the description. And I'll try and answer your questions to the best of my ability. But anyway, thank you for watching today's video. I really hope it helped you out. Anyway, I'll catch you in the next one.